quite frankly, we're going to see epidemics of osteoporosis like we've never seen. We're swinging so far the other way that individuals are demonizing whole foods in order to offer processed fake meats.
Yeah.
That's insane.
How much protein you can opt for maximal optimal health?
I have actually changed my answer on this. I think that that's probably going to be the way of the future in terms of cyclical protein restriction.
What are some of the major misconceptions people have about protein?
So many, I probably couldn't even get to all of them. I imaged her brain, and her brain looked like an Alzheimer's brain, and she wasn't that old. This is a really great example that it's not protein that causes diabetes, right? So part of this discipline of physical training is also training yourself to be uncommon. Muscle is at that core, and resistance training is critical. Could you just do cardiovascular activity and have the body that you want? That's insane. It's insane. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Today we got Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. We're going to talk about muscle-centric medicine, the importance of exercise, the importance of protein and maintaining muscle mass as we age, and just for a better quality of life and aging more gracefully. So welcome to the show, Dr. Lyon. I'm a huge fan.
Thanks, Autumn. I'm actually a huge fan of yours as well. So there you go.
Well, this is amazing. And I've been waiting for this conversation for so long. And so I want to get into muscle-centric medicine and everything. But first, I need to know a little bit about your history and what brought you to this point. I know you have maybe been a vegan or a vegetarian, and now you're really passionate about protein and animal products. And so tell us, give us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, I've had a somewhat of what I believe to be a unique experience as it relates to just medicine and nutrition in general. So I actually graduated high school early. So I graduated 3.5 years, and I moved in with my godmother, who is an OG in the functional medicine space. And her name is Dr. Elizabeth Lipsky. She was the group before Mark Hyman. And she's a PhD in nutritional sciences. So part of the rub was I could move in with her in Hawaii, but as long as I worked for room and board. And that means, I managed the kids and all this other stuff, but I was also able to see patients with her because she was seeing patients at that time out of her office in her home. And this really put me on the trajectory of nutrition and nutritional sciences. So from a very young age, 17 years old, I became obsessed with nutrition. And that obsession never left me up until this day. So I decided to then study human nutrition, vitamin, mineral metabolism in my undergraduate. As chance would have it, I landed in the lab of someone named Dr. Donald Layman. And Dr. Donald Layman, for the people that are really research nerds, is one of the grandfathers, and he would cringe if I say that, one of the grandfathers of protein metabolism. And I trained with him, and he's mentored me for the last 20 years, believe it or not. And so really my perspective on nutrition and muscle health started very early on in my career. Then fast forward, of course, medical school, then residency in family practice, and then a 2-year fellowship in nutritional sciences and geriatrics, which is really where muscle-centric medicine officially was born. I did a 2-year clinical fellowship and research fellowship. It was a combination. And it was just so fascinating. It really looked at the interface of the end of aging. So geriatrics is not the end of life, but 65 and above. And then obesity and the interface between all of those things.
I have so many interesting questions about so many of the things you said. But first I want to show you this because I've had Liz Lipsky on the podcast. It was right next to my desk because I'm reading it,
That's insane. That's insane. So that is Liz Lipsky. There you go. That is Liz Lipsky.
And I just want to reinforce for people, like, she is such a master in her craft, right? In digestive wellness. And then to have Donald Layman and just like, this is where you came from. It makes a lot of sense that you're making such incredible grounds with your messages. And that is so unique and novel. So amazing history. I can't wait to get into, we touched on the vegan vegetarian thing. We'll get back to that because I want to just dive into muscle-centric medicine first. So tell us, geriatrics, what is muscle-centric medicine and why is it different?
Well, let's take a journey through history and kind of look at the current landscape. And the current landscape is very focused on obesity and has been arguably for the last 50 years. And when you have the correct problem, you can generate action to fix it, to solve it. And right now we look through this lens of having this quote obesity epidemic and have treated adipose tissue, fat tissue for 50 years, albeit very unsuccessfully, right? We're fatter than we've ever been. The majority of individuals are overweight. And even with that, maybe 23% of people are even meeting their physical activity exercise. So right now, when we're thinking about this, the question was, well, where did muscle-centric medicine come from? And what, frankly, is it? I had this kind of aha moment when I was in my fellowship where I realized that we had failed everybody. And that was because we were always focusing on fat tissue and body fat. And I was taking care of this one woman. She was a participant in one of the studies that I was working on. And she was a mom of 3 in her late 50s. I tell the story all the time. And she had always yo-yo dieted. And I imaged her brain, and her brain looked like an Alzheimer's brain. And she wasn't that old. Symptom wise, in terms of her functioning, she was okay, but I knew what was in store for her. And if any of the listeners out there know what it's like to have an aging parent or an aging grandparent or someone that they love who has dementia or some kind of cognitive challenges, it's devastating. And I knew what was in store for her. And it made me think, okay, well, all of these people that I'm seeing have something in common. And what they have in common isn't that they're over fat. It's that all of them were under muscled. And that was really where this concept of muscle-centric medicine was born. It was that we didn't have a fat problem. What we really had was a muscle problem. And a lot of these issues were beginning decades earlier in muscle, skeletal muscle tissue, before we were seeing overt adiposity or overt weight gain. And muscle-centric medicine is exactly that. It is making muscle the pinnacle of health and the focal point rather than obesity and trying to catch up with obesity or lose weight.
It's so genius for so many reasons because of just psychology, right? It's better to focus on something you want than something you want to get rid of, right? Something that we can build. And also, there's a relationship between the size of the waist and the memory center of the brain, right? And so that's just an aside. And I just read that by Dr. Isaacson, that the heavier you get and the more muscle or the more fat you have, the smaller your memory center becomes. So,
and we saw that. So we saw that clinically.
You did.
We saw that clinically. Oh, yes. So we saw that clinically when we were we did a whole battery of cognitive tests, and we definitely saw that. We definitely saw the correlation between obesity and cognitive function.
Yeah. And I love your message because it's so empowering. Like everybody can work towards getting more muscle, right?
Exactly.
And it feels better to do that. So let's talk about it. How do we do that, Dr. Lyon? Like what are the major levers we can pull to gain more muscle?
Yeah, of course. And, when we think about anything in health and wellness, it is somewhat complex. I really love what you said in this concept of what is the thing that we can do something about. Well, last time I checked, we can't exercise our fat tissue and we can't exercise our liver. Drinking does not count. But what we can do is that we absolutely can exercise skeletal muscle. And what skeletal muscle is, it's the muscle that we have voluntary control over. It's oftentimes for the listener, it's the biceps or the quadriceps or muscles, again, that we can think about and utilize versus, say, a smooth muscle, which would be, say, a uterus, which you don't have much control over. Understanding that skeletal muscle health is really the pinnacle of everything, or most things as it relates to longevity and aging. The two main things that individuals can do for muscle health are exercise, and that includes resistance training. The point of resistance training is really both strength and hypertrophy. So I do believe that strength is key, and strength can decrease obviously as you age, but also hypertrophy and muscle fibers change as you age if you are not really somewhat of a lifelong exerciser. So strength, hypertrophy, cardiovascular activity, and the cardiovascular activity, not just for the heart, but really for the mitochondria in the muscle. And everyone has heard about mitochondria. It's the powerhouse of the cell. And it really is that fat burning component and just the energy component of the cell. So those are the ways that I think about muscle, what ways in which you can leverage muscle through exercise. And then there's this very interesting component to muscle as a nutrient sensing organ. And when I say nutrient sensing organ, I'm really talking about dietary protein. To put this in context for you, muscle is a metabolic organ system. It's above and beyond looking good in a bikini. It's above and beyond the physical mobility and exercise aspect. It really is the primary site for fatty acid oxidation. It is a major site for glucose disposal, which is carbohydrates that you eat. And, it's a major part for, it plays a role in insulin sensitivity. So What does that mean? That means when we see insulin resistance, a way to think about it is, well, skeletal muscle, it makes up 40, maybe even 50% of an individual's body. That tissue becomes more insulin resistant. And insulin is a peptide hormone released secreted from the pancreas. And its main job, one of its main job is to move glucose, which is carbohydrates that you eat, out of the bloodstream into the cell. The primary site, again, that I'd mentioned for disposal is muscle. When you think about metabolic disease and the things that are plaguing us now, really comes down to skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle insulin resistance is a huge player.
Yes. And we're going to get to the protein piece in a second.
Yeah. That's the only other way to deal with muscle health.
Yeah. And I'm so excited. We're going to really take a deep dive there. But let's talk about exercise for a minute, because what is the proper ratio, right?
Great question.
Where do we begin? How much are we doing? What are you working with specifically?
Yeah, I think that is a very challenging question. So I'm going to give you some broad general recommendations. But again, there's a lot of things that come into play. For example, your training age. How long have you trained? What have you done? What does the rest of your day look like? How healthy is your starting muscle? So the current recommendation is 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity a week. That could be 30 minutes a day. Is that enough for optimal health? Likely not. Is it enough for metabolic health? Also, probably from my perspective, not. What I recommend is individuals really think about exercise as a non-negotiable, as just as important as eating. 3 to 4 days a week of some kind of resistance training with the focus on strength and hypertrophy. And I know that people typically think about strength and hypertrophy as two separate things, right? If you're training for hypertrophy, you're really training for muscle growth, which again, does that have the potential to increase your storage space? It does. And then, of course, strength, which is incredibly valuable, especially as we age. It only gets more challenging, not less challenging, to maintain that. So 3 to 4 days of a well-designed program is critical. What is a well-designed program? I think that there's a million different ways. Ultimately, what we're looking for is adaptation. So creating enough stimulus to provide an adaptation for something. There's a million different ways to do that. Getting with a good fitness professional is really where the magic is going to really interface. But 3 to 4 days of resistance training. And then 1 day a week where you're doing something that is really getting your breathing up. And this is what people often think about as some kind of high intensity or even sprint interval training. And that's kind of at the max threshold for nerds out there. You're looking at 90% or more of your VO2 max. So it's really an all out effort. And I think that takes a little mental fortitude and toughness, but you don't have to start there. You could do some kind of high intensity interval training, which is obviously lower in intensity. And then cardiovascular activity, believe it or not, which is that zone 2 training, not totally effective in body composition changes, those kinds of things, but it is helpful for mitochondria.
Okay. Those are great.
Yeah. So I know that that's a lot of things to think about. But again, really, really important.
Yeah. And I came out of the Tracy Anderson world, right? So
okay.
I worked for her for a long time, love her method. But then as I've been aging, I realized I need to get bigger weights are working for me and less cardio as I've passed 40. So I'm wondering, can you give us a day or a week in your exercise regimen? And then maybe some people on YouTube that you think are doing it well.
Yeah. Autumn, well, first of all, I think that I just want to highlight what you're doing is that you've moved from kind of the chronic cardio to more resistance training. For body composition, nothing beats that.
Yeah.
For body composition, for composition and longevity, that's the way to go. Because again, skeletal muscle is this metabolic organ system that really is the key regulator to metabolism, which we often think about, but it's just so important when we think about these diseases of aging, whether it's insulin resistance, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Muscle is at that core, and resistance training is critical. Could you just do cardiovascular activity and have the body that you want? Likely not. Does it affect muscle? It does, but again, not in the way hypertrophy or strength training does, right? And so your original question was, I can't even remember because I just went off on the tangent, but
it was an important tangent, and I'm just asking what you're working with.
Oh, my workout.
Any YouTube people that you think people can watch?
Yes. So my workout, so I recently changed and I've been a little bored. I had been doing 3 days a week of very heavy leg training and throwing in 1 day a week of intervals. We use an assault bike, and then a few other days of maybe 30 30 to 45 minutes of kind of moderate intensity exercise. But now what I've switched to is 3 days of full body activity, 3 days of lifting, full body activity, 1 day of CrossFit.
Okay.
And yes, so this is like new for this week. 1 day of CrossFit. I'll be adding that in. So that'll be on a Thursday, and then 1 day of a longer steady state.
Okay. I love it. And do you think, I used to teach yoga, is that going to be enough for somebody if that is their primary or sole source of exercise, or should we also be lifting weights in addition to yoga?
So let me ask you this. I think that yoga is great. I do yoga. We have family yoga night every night. Actually, we do it with the kids. Do I think it's enough? It depends on what the outcome is that you're looking for. If the outcome is for strength and hypertrophy, it is unlikely going to be the most high priority stimulus. Is it great for stretch? Yes. But is it enough? I have not, if your goal is strength and hypertrophy.
No.
Have you ever seen a massively jacked yoga person?
No, not really.
No. I mean, not that that's some, indication for anything, but
okay. And before we dive into the protein piece, I need to know this relationship between the immune system and muscle. Why is the immune system, why is it important? Yeah.
It's really interesting. A lot of diseases and disease states have chronic inflammation. And that is an issue. Muscle, when you contract it, not just inflammation, but also immune dysregulation, which can contribute to, immune dysregulation can definitely contribute to, inflammation. Even if it's low grade inflammation. Exercising skeletal muscle releases interleukin 6, and that's probably the most studied myokine. And what that does is it interfaces with the immune system, whether it's to lower inflammation from processes that are happening, because of course macrophages also produce these cytokines, which we've all heard of, this cytokine storm. But the myokines that are released from skeletal muscle have a potential to blunt this immune response, this overt, robust immune response, to actually help bring it into homeostasis, which is simply balance.
Wow.
It's another mechanism of which skeletal muscle really impacts the body above and beyond even metabolism in its role in immune function. For example, in my clinical practice, we have patients with rheumatoid arthritis, we have patients with lupus, we have patients with some, on the spectrum of autoimmune diseases. And one of the things that we always see is their symptoms always improve with exercise. Now, that doesn't mean that they can be off medications or any of the biologics, but they certainly, what we've seen in clinical practice, they definitely can lower their consumption.
That's amazing. And what about COVID? Did you see any relationship between lean muscle mass and outcomes, or was anyone studying that?
I did not look at that. But I think it's fair to say that the more muscle mass you have in general, the better your survivability.
Fantastic. Okay.
Across all things,
Yeah. And so let's get into protein, because there's so many misconceptions around it. So we're going to talk about the importance, but I think begin there. Like, what are some of the major misconceptions people have about protein?
Yeah. So many, I probably couldn't even get to all of them, but I could start with the first misconception I think people have. And again, these are a bit old school, is that protein is bad for the kidneys. Protein is bad for the bone. If I eat too much protein, I'm going to get bulky, or if I exercise and eat too much protein, I'm going to get bulky. None of those things are true. When you think about kidney function, healthy kidneys can tolerate protein, right? In fact, there's a handful of meta-analyses which takes high quality data, looks at it, and if anything, dietary protein augments or helps glomerular filtration. That is a positive. In terms of bone function, it's actually critical. We need dietary protein to build bone.
And we just have a higher risk of osteoporosis or anything like that if we don't have it?
You can't make it. Yeah. I mean, could you survive on it? Yeah. But the bone density, again, dietary protein is essential. We have a low need for essential fatty acids. It's very little, but we have a pretty high need for protein. Yeah. It is arguably the most important essential macronutrient. You need it for everything, for bone turnover, for body turnover, for organ systems, for muscle, for hormones, for anything that you can think of, for anything that also has a structure, which is just about everything. You do need dietary protein.
And so what about the misconception that we're eating too much protein?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we're not actually eating too much protein. The average, if we were to look at some of the NHANES data, and NHANES is the largest data set that we really have access to. It's pretty much what people use when they're looking at populations. And what we know is that the average woman may get around 65 to 70 grams of protein a day. That's pretty low. And then the average male might get 100 grams. Maybe. The concept that we are over consuming protein is not, I would say, not accurate.
Okay. And I want you to give us very specific recommendations in a second, but I also want to touch on another major misconception. What about us eating the wrong types of protein, as in animal protein versus plant protein? Do you?
Yeah. I mean, this is an unfortunate experience that I think that everybody's happening, which is one reason why I love Paleo Valley so much, is you guys stand by high quality protein. For anyone listening, your fermentable sticks are fermented sticks are my favorite. The beet, like all of them. I'm obsessed. In fact, I need more. I actually do need more.
I'll send you some.
My kids love them too. So, I've been in the nutrition space for about 20 years. And up until the rise of social media, there was never this narrative about, it was never as prominent as it appears to be now. And that's just, very interesting, that this concept that high quality protein is bad for you. So this is kind of the narrative that people will hear. It's like the mouse with the microphone.
Yeah.
And you'll hear that dairy is bad for you, that red meat is bad for you, that all these foods that we have come up on as humans are bad for us now, right? Which is interesting because many of these things are whole foods. I think taking a step back and understanding what's happening is we're swinging so far the other way that individuals are demonizing whole foods in order to offer processed fake meats.
Yeah.
That's insane. It's insane. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And again, this was not like this 7 years ago, right? This was not like this before this big, robust rise in social media. So where do we go from here? Plant protein and animal protein are different. Okay, this is just the way that it is. These are hard, fast biological numbers. It's based on these amino acid profiles. This is just what it is. The way in which we have graded dietary protein is really based on these amino acids, the limiting or essential amino acids. There are 20 amino acids, 9 in which of those are essential, meaning we have to get them from food. And when you think about protein, you have to think about it in two ways. Number one, you think about it as an overall macronutrient, as the macronutrient protein in and of itself to help build muscle, to help maintain metabolic health. And then the other component to protein, and really the discussion around protein, is the amino acid requirements. So I just told you that there are 20 different amino acids, 9 of which are essential. Each has its own role in the body, all for building new tissue, but then secondarily, each has its own unique role. So when you eliminate an entire food group like animal-based products, you really decrease your amount of these essential amino acids.
Yes. And if our goal is to build more muscle, are there specific amino acids that might be more useful than others for doing that?
Yeah, of course. Now, I want to also caveat people and say, listen, could you be a vegan or vegetarian and still build muscle? Absolutely. Could you equivocally meet your protein needs with, say, pea, rice blend shakes, all that? You can. Could you just be as strong? Possibly. It does take a lot of education. You probably have to supplement B12 and iron and do all these other things. And we can all agree that the animal-based product is different than a plant-based product, just in nutrients, right? In iron and all these other things. But it's not to say that you can't do one or the other. Again, it's what is the goal? How do you do it for optimization? And what do we think about over long-term strategies? When it comes to the secondary role of amino acids as individual signaling molecules, like you had mentioned, which I know that you already know all these answers and you're doing such a good job. When you think about dietary protein, we really have to think about the branched chain amino acids as it relates to muscle health. And they're very unique. Branched chain amino acids are the key amino acids really for muscle health. And in particular, so they are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And leucine is one of the amino acids, the primary amino acid for triggering muscle protein synthesis. Now, here's the rub, which is so amazing. If you eat for muscle health, all the other amino acids fall into place. If you're eating whole foods for muscle health, then you meet your macronutrient needs in a robust way. And then you're able to provide the body with these amino acids that all have secondary roles. And this is critical. So you're going to ask me, the next question you're going to ask me is, well, how do you do that?
Yes.
And luckily, this answer is very simple.
Yeah. And
that is really understanding that protein must be eaten in a meal threshold. You can think about dietary protein as how much you're getting in a day. For example, Autumn, how much do you weigh?
Oh, 120.
Okay, so then for you, I would say your ideal protein intake would be 120 grams. Now, are you going to have multiple meals of 15 grams? No, you're not. You are going to have between 30 and 50 grams of dietary protein, even on the higher end per meal. So at the low end, it would be 30 grams. And at the high end, I was just reading some research yesterday, actually, for aging individuals, which you're not considered aging, would be upwards of 70 grams, could have even a robust effect.
Wow.
So understanding that you're not sipping on like a beef protein shake or a protein shake, but actually ingesting that protein at one time. And maybe it's within 30 minutes, but really sitting down and ingesting it so that the blood levels of amino acid reach a certain level and that can trigger muscle protein synthesis. So that is really critical to understand. And the other thing is the RDA, which is the recommended dietary allowance, currently recommends 2 to 3 grams of leucine a day. And that it's more likely 2 to 3 grams per meal. A better recommendation would be anywhere between 8 and 9 grams of leucine.
Right. Because those recommended daily amounts, they're more of low, like a low.
Yeah, totally. And the data would support that. So it's really a minimum amount to prevent deficiencies. So the 95% of the population to prevent deficiencies.
Okay.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it's optimal. And listen, the data would support so many more of the position statements like the ProDage study and these other position statements would recommend at least 1.2 grams per kilogram, even upwards of 1.6 grams per kilogram, probably maybe moving more towards that as a minimum, which is double the RDA.
Okay, awesome. And I'm wondering, I've heard that if you have more vegetarian sources, if you just get to that 1.6 grams, the differences in protein synthesis, muscle protein synthesis kind of disappear. Is that true?
You could totally do that. But of course you could account for, the amount of carbohydrates. You just would have to really be careful in terms of how you're going to do that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And this is something I do not know. And I have a note, and I remember watching your video about it. Proteostasis as it relates to like a bone broth protein. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. So this is interesting. This concept of proteostasis, actually, I sat down on my podcast and spoke with Dr. Tracy Anthony, who really is an expert in this area. And she's an expert in protein restriction. And typically these sulfur amino acids, whether it's methionine, typically thought of as methionine restriction. And that is going through periods of time where you have an unbalanced protein amount. And that it's really more of an amino acid restriction. So methionine is one of the amino acids, and it's ultimately an amino acid restriction. And her and I were talking about what does that do? And how does that actually affect the body and create this hormetic effect where the body becomes a bit stressed and has the opportunity to repair, remove, regenerate. And that's where we were talking where this bone broth comes in, because it is devoid of some amino acids. And, it's very low in the branched chain amino acids, it's high in glycine and proline, but it is also low. It's totally devoid in tryptophan. And so potentially using the imbalanced foods to kind of cause a robust stress in the body, not in a negative way, but in a very controlled way to help with regeneration.
Yeah. So do you believe there's validity there? Because we have the anti-aging community saying that sometimes we need to restrict protein. How do you?
Oh, totally. And I think that that's probably going to be the way of the future in terms of cyclical protein restriction. So I do think that there probably is some benefit to that. I use it personally. I've been using it in my clinic for a very long time. Again, I think that the body has seasons, and it doesn't mean that you would do it for months, right? You do need to protect skeletal muscle, but dietary protein restriction could easily be, 3 days, 5 days, every 3 months. I don't think that we have an exact answer for what that looks like. Just kind of have to play around. I think that there is validity to that for sure.
Yeah. Could that look like doing like a bone broth only source of protein and then having vegetables and fruits with that? Is that kind of what you do? What do you do?
So yes, I will do that as the winter approaches. Yes. Okay. And do I think that there's validity in that? I do actually.
That's really cool. See, I love your nuanced approach. And one thing I hear about bone broth sometimes, because it is devoid in tryptophan, is that it can tank mental health. I'm wondering, what do you think? Protein is also very important for mental health. So can you talk about that? And then
bone broth. So bone broth protein, and they did these really early studies where they just used collagen protein. They had some pretty significantly negative effects. You can't just use collagen protein and that be your only source. And these were in heavily controlled environments where everything was restricted aside from these, collagen. this kind of feeding strategy. Again, would that normally happen in everyday life? Probably not.
Okay. And what about the timing of protein intake? Maybe even at different stages of life, right? As we go into perimenopause and menopause, what time of day should we be eating protein? And like you said, 3 meals.
Yeah, no, so I have actually changed my answer on this.
Okay.
A very good friend, Kristen Holmes, she's amazing. And she talks a lot about circadian biology. She's getting her PhD right now. And she really changed the way that I thought about things. I always had people kind of do a earlier fasting window and then break their fast, I don't know, 11, 12, whatever they want. But the data would begin to support that we push our feeding window earlier. So the feeding window would be earlier and then we end earlier. And so that is something new that I've incorporated. Okay. Which I never did before. And I will say that around perimenopause and menopause, this is where, again, you asked a really great question earlier, like, what do you recommend for exercise? And I said, oh, well, you recommend, this is what the average recommendation is 150 minutes, probably not enough. But again, there's this mental component. As you go to perimenopause, menopause, when hormones are shifting, I think that you really do have to make up for, and again, this is just my opinion, you have to make up for this decline in hormones. And you really have to think about pushing your body harder rather than skating. And I don't mean like, ice skating. I mean, you really have to begin to push your body. This is where high intensity interval training comes in, I think is very valuable. And I think actually increasing those kinds of activities, whether it's 2 days a week, I think is very valuable. And listen, the evidence would suggest that you could lift, whether you lift heavy or light weights, as long as you're going to failure or close to failure and putting enough stimulus in, that's amazing. Because I actually always felt that as you age, you need to lift heavier because of those declining hormones. And that's not actually what the data would support. But again, that means that you're doing 40 to 50 reps of something, you better be completely dialed in.
Wow. I love it. So you do like how much, if you do 2 times a week of this high intensity stuff, would a Tabata thing count? Would just like 10 minutes of intervals count? Like,
great question. Again, this is like, where's your intensity? So if you are doing something that is a max sprint interval, you're probably going to get a good 10 seconds out of that.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be crushed. You maybe 10, 20 seconds. I mean, could you even hold that pace for 20 seconds? Probably not. You'd be crushed.
Yeah.
So these are all really good questions. And I think this is where tracking is really important. How, like, for example, when I do the Airdyne, I recently did an interview with, he's a former pararescue. His name is Doug, and he went to Columbia Physical Therapy. And I don't think we released our episode yet, but he was talking about the quality of the training, and that if you are doing it right, it's incredibly efficient and it's very, very short-lived, like 4 minutes. Like you could really crush yourself in 4 minutes.
Yeah. That's what I think is so exciting. Cause like you said, I used to spend hours doing cardio, and now I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. And if I can get that effect in 10 minutes, amazing.
Right. But think about the mental fortitude, Autumn, that it's going to take to do that, which you could swing, like you could totally swing that. But I think that that's because you've trained yourself up to be able to be in an entrepreneurial, uncomfortable situation. I think that is not common. So part of this discipline of physical training is also training yourself to be uncommon.
Ooh, I love that. And how do you do that? Tell people like a few tips. Like if someone's out there like, oh, this all sounds so good, but where do I begin? Like, how do we walk through that?
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to be ready. And this is where getting a teammate is really important. Either that, or unless you have some massive, serious self-reflection that one could do on your own, if you're not working hard enough. But I don't think that you should just go through the motions. I think that's a mistake. Having a teammate, like, go ahead and email Autumn, you can train with her, but really getting after it.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. And so a few last questions, so give me that timing piece. I like that you changed that. So are we starting at 8 a.m. and ending at 5 a.m. or I'm sorry, not 5 p.m.
5 p.m.
Yeah.
I think it depends on where you live, like where that, when the sun comes up. So when I was talking to Kristen, I was like, well, what are the things that you do every day? And she's like, well, I get out and I sit outside, or I, do my morning coffee walk. And again, I think it depends on where you are, and then ending, kind of thinking about ending earlier, at least I could say, and not eating 2 hours before bed.
Okay. I like that. Yeah. And so I know at different like you said, geriatrics and people who are pregnant, people who are nursing, people who are athletes. Like there's not one just protein recommendation. So can you give us an idea of how much protein you can opt for maximal optimal health in those situations?
So my recommendation is robust, and I recommend you start with 1 gram per pound ideal body weight.
Okay.
You could titrate up or you could titrate down. But it's not, I don't think that it's, we haven't seen evidence that it's going to harm you. But I think that you start with 1 gram per pound ideal body weight, and you have a protein forward meal. And then you can determine where you're going to go from there. So for example, for you, you're 120 pounds, you would do 120 grams of protein. You could have your first meal have 50 grams of protein. Your last meal has 50 grams of protein. And then somewhere in the middle, maybe you have a 20-gram meal. Yeah. And let's say you look pretty lean and fit. So could you tolerate a 1-to-1 ratio of protein to carbohydrates? You totally could. Mm-hmm. And how would I do it? I would probably minimize the first carbohydrate meal. So for you, if you were my patient, I would say, okay, so we're going to do 120 grams of protein. We're going to do 50 grams in the morning, 50 grams before, for your last meal, 20 grams in the middle. But that first meal, I'd probably keep your carbohydrates, 20, 25 grams or less. And then that second meal, I would do a 1-to-1 ratio. And then that last meal, I'd probably do a 1-to-1 ratio of protein to carbs, but I would not go over 50 grams of carbs unless it was post-training.
Beautiful. Thank you for all of that. That's amazing. And so I have another question that I just thought of. My dad went into the hospital the other day. He had uncontrolled diabetes. Yeah. I put him on a very high protein diet. And I know I've heard from interviews that you say that it doesn't necessarily bring your insulin down. You can still have high blood sugar if you're primarily eating protein, or maybe that is something I misunderstood about what you were saying. Can you talk about that relationship? And
so, yeah, absolutely. So, what you're referring to is that, well, number one, so your dad has diabetes?
He does. He didn't know it, but he does.
Okay. Yeah. So this is a really great example that it's not protein that causes diabetes, right? It's not, this is a excess calorie carbohydrate issue. Insulin and carbs is not a protein issue. Again, we have to think about what is the lens that we're viewing this through. So the individuals that are kind of like anti-protein are typically, maybe they're two groups. Maybe they're vegan or vegetarian, or they are a keto group. And they'll say, well, you really should shy away from dietary protein because it causes an insulin secretion. Okay. It causes a phase 1 insulin release, which is, the mechanism of that is likely to help augment muscle health, but it is not a phase 1, phase 2 insulin release. It's not this hugely robust. If you took 100 grams of dietary protein and 100 grams of carbohydrates, would you get the same insulin release? You would not.
Yeah.
It's much more limited.
And if are you still an advocate of the carnivore diet? Do you feel like there's certain populations or times of life or even seasons where bringing that in for people who are not is beneficial?
I think that, again, I think fiber actually is very important for people. That being said, do I think that there's an issue with a carnivore diet in the short term? I don't. I think when you do these things, number one, you of course can look to the best of an individual's capacity at their gut microbiome. It's still, we don't really know exactly all the details, but getting a baseline test, whatever that is for the individual. Do I think, you asked me, do I think that the carnivore diet, I think there's many ways to get an end result. I think that there's many ways to get an end result. But again, I would say for the longest time, I was mostly carnivore, but depending on the season, I'll add fruit. Depending on the season, I do think fiber is really important. Prebiotics are really important.
Okay, well, let's end on just like talking about you. So what does a day in the life of your meals look like, and exercise right now?
Yeah. So this morning I got up and I trained early. I have 2 really little kids, and one just will not sleep in the bed. So we're working on that. It's like brutal. So I got up at 6, which is a little late, caffeinated myself, red lighted myself, and then went to the gym. I threw probably another cup of caffeine in there, then went to the gym. And today was full body. So I've been traveling a lot, and now it's just kind of getting back in the swing of things. Even though I train when I'm traveling, it was just, I need to kind of get back. And I'm nursing an old injury. So we did, what did we do? So we did legs and upper body, a lot of lunges and things of that nature. And I came home, I had like 20 grams of protein, nothing crazy, sat outside, it's freezing here right in New York. That's it. Haven't eaten anything since, but I will probably have a bigger meal in about 40 minutes. And then I'll have dinner with the kids.
Beautiful. So you're having 20 grams of protein post exercise. I'm wondering, do you think that's enough, or is it because you're going to have a meal that is larger and you're going to have more protein soon?
Autumn, you're so smart. Your reputation is right on the money here. By the way, for the listener, Autumn has the best reputation. Autumn, do you know that? You have a great reputation in the space.
I don't know that. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Lyon. That's so sweet.
You have a great reputation in the space.
I love that.
So the 20 grams of protein is likely enough post-training because I have an increase in blood flow. My muscle is really primed for those amino acids.
Fasting. Do you think, so you did a fasted exercise kind of with a little caffeine in there. Do you think that's a good way to go as we age as women, or is, just so individual?
Yeah. I think if you need to eat prior to training, you can. I don't think it's necessary. Again, I'm not sure that the evidence doesn't necessarily support protein prior to training. Is fasting training better? I think it depends on what your goals and your outcomes are, what you're looking for. For me, I am kind of reevaluating my fitness right now. Thinking about like what is next for me. I always thrive better under a challenge. So this is now kind of, as I'm rolling into January 1, what is going to be the next thing for me? Just thinking about some kettlebell competitions, like what am I going to do now next?
Amazing. I love that. And I'm wondering, last thing, tell us your story about were you a vegetarian or a vegan at one point? And I know you have great respect for that community and you never belittle that. I love that about you. Tell me how, if you were, how that was, and if your diet, how you changed.
Yeah. So when I moved in with my godmother at 17, I was really, really into health at that time. And I actually was mostly vegetarian. And then there was a part in college where I was macrobiotic, like mostly vegan. And I did it for, more like for animal purposes. I felt really badly about eating animals. And for whatever I was thinking about it, I felt like the right thing to do. It was kind of an emotional decision, but I couldn't support myself and my training. I ended up, for whatever reason, I just was exhausted. I was obsessed with food. There's some data to support that the body will continue to feed to meet an amino acid requirement. And this is really from Steve Simpson. And this is the protein leverage hypothesis. And, what I was experiencing then, I didn't realize, but I wasn't meeting my protein requirements. And I was just like obsessed with food. I couldn't manage my blood sugar. It was very unbalanced. And I ended up just getting sick and I became anemic and I wasn't healthy. I'll never forget. I remember the first time I ate chicken in years and I was like crying. And by the way, it tasted so good. But, and perhaps had I had more knowledge, maybe I could have done it, but I realized that when I was early on in my career, I think it's easy to go into extremes. And that's where that extreme was for me. And then I felt tremendously better as I began to have a more balanced diet. And if someone is vegan or vegetarian, I completely understand, right? I'm not against that. I think that it's really important to be open-minded and not hear what you want. And if you're going to do it for one way or the other, at least have intellectual honesty with yourself. Like, what is the purpose? Why do I believe this? Do I want to believe this? Or is the evidence actually supporting this? Or how do I even feel?
Yeah. Prioritizing yourself. Do you think there's a particular concern for people who are developing young kids or?
I do. Yeah. I think that it is. I think that quite frankly, we're going to see epidemics of osteoporosis like we've never seen because of the plant-based movement in young women.
Yeah. Right.
Because in their bone building age and their muscle building age and their, because I see patients in real life, their body compositions are not where they should be, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's something that concerns me for sure. Well, Dr. Lyon, this has been incredible. So this is my last moment for you. I want you to tell us about your book.
Yeah. Right? Oh my God. I can't wait.
And so I have a book connect. Yeah. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. And then one other thing, if there's any other lifestyle things, you did a little red light, we were talking exercise. If there's anything else that you think is going to really help people, that now is the time to put that into.
Yeah. I think doing something really, really hard. I I think doing something really, really hard, and I used to do something really, really hard all the time. And I think that as we get busy and wrapped up in whatever it is that we're building, we have a tendency to do less hard things. I think that that's the wrong way to be. Could it be an ice bath and all these other things? Yeah, but I think that there has to be a component of embracing the suck. And I think that that does really need to happen. And you need to pick something to embrace the suck.
Well, how are you embracing the suck?
I'm working on it. I am working on what that looks like. I was thinking there's a program called 75 Hard that Andy Frisella made. I was thinking about doing that, but I will have a decision and I will let you know. Autumn, I'll have to get your number from Shayna and get that. But yeah, so by Friday is my deadline for embracing the suck. I'll probably start rucking again. We used to do a 10-mile ruck between 40 and 50-pound weights every Sunday.
Oh,
do something like that. I'll come up with something.
Okay.
We'll re-engage that embrace the suck for sure.
Okay, I'm excited. So now, tell us where to connect with you and tell us about your amazing book and how we can get it.
Yeah, so my book is on pre-sale in February and it's called Forever. It's called right now it's Forever Strong.
Yes.
Forever Strong.
Beautiful.
And so that will go on pre-sale. It's with an imprint of Simon & Schuster. Can go to my website, drgabriellelyon.com. I'm very active on Instagram, same name, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. Also have a podcast called the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show, which is very robust and really fun. Yep. And I have a great newsletter and a YouTube channel. Did I forget anything else?
I don't think so. No, and I'm just saying I watch a lot of your videos and you bring Donald Layman in there and it's like really about what people care about. Do we need to count calories? You're also providing in your podcast access to these researchers who are doing very nerdy, delicious stuff, but
totally.
Something for everybody. So I really appreciate the work. Is there anything you think we missed that is relevant or important to this conversation that you want to leave with people as a takeaway?
I think understanding that dietary protein has a lot of noise around it and that it really does have dual roles. Every amino acid has more than one role above and beyond just this macronutrient that we think about it. And that while you can't really do one or the other, you can't just exercise and not eat well, and you can't just eat well and not exercise. The majority of individuals don't meet their physical recommendations for activity. So we have to address the low-hanging fruit, which is nutrition. You can live your entire life and never exercise a day in your life. Yeah. You cannot live your entire life and survive without eating. So you might as well get the thing that you have to do right, knocked out.
Amazing, Dr. Lyon. Thank you so much for this.
Of course.
You're cheerleaders, and that's why we sponsor your podcast. And so just thank you.
Yes.
I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.